is the Russini Report. With the Athletic's senior NFL insider, Dianna Russini.
Welcome to the Russini Report on the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me today is the Athletic's senior NFL insider, Dianna Russini. Dan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm busy doing Entertainment Tonight, Extra, all the shows that I went to school and I was studying journalism for, that I was like, if I could just make the gossip TV and the gossip papers, I've made it. And so this week, Robert, I've made it.
The wave from Taylor Swift is definitely going to be the highlight of your NFL season. It's never getting any better than it was in that moment. So great job by you.
Thank you so much. There's not a lot of videos I've recorded in my life that have gotten the attention that the video of Taylor has received. But people love Taylor. I love her music. I'm not a Swiftie, but I think I'm leaning into it now. I think I'm a Swiftie. She was really nice. She said hi to me. I mean, how many people can say that? So, it was Sunday Night Football was pretty wild because of all the hype around her just being at the stadium. So it was pretty cool.
That was a nice moment at MetLife Stadium this week. Some not so nice moments yesterday during the Giants-Seahawks game. The Giants get absolutely pummeled by Seattle on national TV. I can understand justifying some pass protection struggles when you're playing the Niners on Thursday night. 11 days of rest to have that sort of performance against a Seahawks defense that wasn't exactly getting after people. What are we looking at with the kind of the tone, the vibe, the mood in that Giants building? Because everything on the sideline felt pretty combustible last night when you were looking at how this thing was unfolding for New York.
Yeah, we actually saw them frustrated and losing some of their cool on the sidelines. Players, coaches, obviously we saw Brian Daboll throw the iPad, when he was chatting.
Disgustedly flipping it to the ground.
I downplayed the way that was. Yeah, he was pretty fired up. He was as angry. I think I've seen a coach this season on the sidelines for sure. But first, let's just go like macro on the Giants right now. I mean, this is a team that went in with a lot of expectations because of the success they had last year. Brian Daboll coming off a Coach of the Year season, and when you take a look back at some of those games, you have to wonder why there was so much expectations headed into this year. It's not like they made so many significant moves to improve themselves as a team. The roster doesn't look that different. They didn't address any of the gigantic issues. They just paid the guys that they had. Now, with that in mind, they did have a grueling schedule to come out of the gate. Yes, they had this rest headed into the game. They were without their two key players and their offensive lineman, Andrew Thomas, right, and Saquon Barkley. So already they're headed into that MetLife Stadium situation, at a disadvantage. But obviously the big story hovering over this is a team that chose to pay Daniel Jones. They decided within the walls of the Giants facility that he was their guy, that he has enough ability and Brian Daboll has enough offensive mind and play calling skills to get the best out of Daniel. And they invested in him. So now here we are. We saw what they looked like on Monday Night Football. This thing is close to catching fire in terms of their season. And in the building, there is so much frustration, but there is still belief in Daniel. And Robert, doesn't there have to be? They paid him.
They don't have a choice at this point.
They have
at least for the next 2 years, they don't have a choice. And I understand that they're hurt up front. I understand they've played some tough teams. Again, Seattle's defense is not that formidable when you compare it to the Niners and the Cowboys. And every team in the league seemingly has issues up front right now. You don't have to look far for an example of a team playing with mostly backup offensive line that's thriving on offense. They played one last night in the Seahawks. Look at what the Texans have been early this season with CJ Stroud in a backup offensive line. So you can say as much as you want, we're banged up. You shouldn't look like that in an NFL game, no matter what the state of your offensive line is.
Exactly. It's so hard to evaluate what the offense looks like because they can't even get there. But that's part of the offense, right? Isn't that part of the issue? The only other team I know of plays in the same stadium that gets as much criticism on their offensive line that have yet to really figure out how to make it work. They looked a little bit better, that being the Jets on Sunday Night Football against a really good pass rush in the Kansas City Chiefs. But that's because their quarterback moved a lot and they were making plays to confuse this Chiefs defense, which is what they told me. Now, last night, you didn't see any of that. You're seeing Darren Waller, who's supposed to be their number one receiver, who's supposed to be the guy, now part of the protection. He was not brought in here to do that. Yes, that's a skill set of his that he can do well. But if you're relying on your best pass catcher to be part of this offensive line and protecting your quarterback, I think you have a laundry list of issues here. And we saw it. We saw it last night.
There's no doubt.
You look at Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones, right? And you look at this relationship, and you have to figure this is a head coach that's worked with Josh Allen, Tom Brady. He's worked with guys who know better than to throw it to a trap corner, right? And I think that's what bubbled up. It's like, this mistake is too big and too bad and too amateur for what we're trying to do here at this level.
When Brian Daboll got that job in New York, I went back to a conversation I had in a story that I had written probably 3 years ago, where I talked to Derek Anderson, who was the backup quarterback on those early Bills teams. He'd worked with Brian at a couple different stops in Cleveland. They had a history together, and he was the backup early in Josh Allen's career. And he told me that one of the key things that the Bills did early in Brian's tenure is they moved him up to the box to call offensive plays. Because when he was down on the field, every once in a while, he would get too caught up in the emotions, and it would be hard to move on from the previous drive and kind of reset yourself. And as a head coach, you aren't afforded that sort of luxury. You're in it in every single moment. And last year, they didn't really have to worry about frustrating moments because the story was great. They were headed in the right direction. He was justifiably, in my mind, the coach of the year. So we didn't have to see him and that staff navigate these frustrating stretches that we've seen so far. So when I watched that last night, that conversation that I had with Derek Anderson was in the back of my mind, because for the first time, really, since this staff got put into place in New York, they are facing real adversity. And I think it's worth watching how they try to steer themselves out of it.
And adversity always reveals the true character, right? And this is not a knock on Brian Daboll's overall makeup as being an emotional person, because there are actually some positives to that, right? So anytime I've talked to people that have played with him or played under him or have worked with him, he's always described it, and this is in a kind manner, he's a psycho, right? Like, oh, he's such a psycho, right? And it's usually said with a smile, because he does have a lot of layers to him, and he is a great motivator, and he is a player's coach. I mean, he's the type of guy, he FaceTimes all of his players. He just randomly will call them and cold call. And he has this great way of just kind of throwing himself into this. And he's obsessive about details, obsessive. And even scaling back to that tower, going back to what you just discussed when you did the article on him, when there were job openings available, I recall there were some concerns about some of this in Brian Daboll's coaching resume in terms of him being really fiery. And you think of the brand of football, the New York Giants, they normally don't hire these types, right? Like, that's what makes this actually very interesting too, because of the type of personality they have on the sideline here leading their team compared to what we've seen in the past. And Coughlin had his moments too, but that was after he was established and built, and that's what Daboll's trying to do here. But that being said, I do think all eyes are on the relationship with Daniel Jones, who I know, I covered them enough. They have a great one. They do. And all quarterbacks love him because he is so creative and smart, and he's all in on it. But we saw that frustration on national television last night.
A little bit fiery is good, but right now it feels like the building is on fire, and that's a little bit too much. So certainly worth monitoring as the Giants try to direct themselves out of this tailspin that has been the start of their season. Let's get to some injury news, some injury updates. We're 4 weeks in, meaning that players who started the season on the PUP list or started the season on IR, they can open the 21-day practice window to potentially return. Two guys that we have our eyes on here, Cooper Kupp and Von Miller. When can we expect to see each of them either at practice or even back on the field starting in week 5?
So the first thing you think of with Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford and Kupp are, we know how they are. They're in terms of their play, what they like. They love the deep overs, right? And that full speed, deep threat that he has become and has had success with. So when you go inside their offense and you try to take a look at and try to figure out where he's at in terms of his overall health, that's where they want him to be 80-90%, right? So take that and apply to where they're dealing with right now, which is they don't feel he's there just yet. Okay. So I was told from the Rams, they are taking this day by day here. The hope is that he plays. That is always the optimism there. But they want to be really careful, knowing they want to see him be able to do what he does well for them versus rolling him out there and just being okay and even possibly re-injuring it, right? So that's always something that's part of this. And Robert, if you remember when this injury happened initially, it seemed fishy, right? It was like a specialist in Minnesota, and we're kind of saying to ourselves, when I go see a specialist, when you go see a specialist, it's usually not good, right? It's way more than the regular trip to the doctor. And from what I discovered through some conversations over the last few weeks, fortunately for him, it was not as serious as perhaps they may have thought it was going to be. So that's really good for Cooper Kupp. That's really good for the Rams, but they still want to be really conservative here. So that's the receiver situation in LA right now.
It helps that they're playing well. If Puka Nacua hadn't shown what he's shown so far this season, if the offense wasn't humming like it is, maybe a little bit more urgency to get him on the field. But when you're playing well, no need to rush a guy back who's been dealing with some injuries, who's getting up there in age, and who you've really committed to. I mean, you are very invested in what he means to your football team. So I understand maybe being a little bit more cautious with it. You could probably say the same thing about Von Miller and what's happening in Buffalo. The defense is playing fantastic for the Bills. They've been patient throughout this entire process with Von. Do you think we see Von Miller on the field sooner rather than later, or do you think that there's going to be that similar level of caution happening in Buffalo?
Yeah, they've been really conservative because Von has been telling people that he was ready to go at the start of the season.
For
right?
week one, yeah.
And he felt good, right? So when you hear the players say that, and the players always want to play, right? So, well, maybe not all the players, actually, now that I think about it, especially those that have contracts coming up. And what maybe in New York, like Saquon, right? People that perhaps maybe be a little bit more conservative. But for someone like Von Miller who wants to get out there, right? He did all the rehab, and, I'm sure he dealt with tons of frustrations with that injury at his age. But the Bills need to be smart here, and they want to be smart. And from what I can gather, I think they're just going to keep the same formula that they've stuck with this entire time, which is let's be smart, let's be patient. There is no reason we've got to push and roll him out there right now, especially a team that is rolling themselves as they've been able to play. I mean, they do have problems on defense in terms of the injuries, but I think for them, they know they're going to be playing in January, and they should be smart now.
Brandon Beane deserves a lot of credit, I think, for some of the marginal moves that he made this offseason. Going out and getting Leonard Floyd at a discount after he was released by the Rams has given them a little bit of leeway in what they can do with Von Miller. And the same goes for the move they made for Taylor Rapp. We didn't even notice that Jordan Poyer didn't play in that game on Sunday. And that's what this team has done a really good job of. That's what this organization, I think, has done a really good job of. They haven't drafted fantastic. It's not the typical markers of what a successful GM is, but I think he's done a really good job of being proactive about where their issues are. And I think that's shown up in a couple different ways. And it makes sense that would lead them to be a little bit more conservative with Von's timeline.
It's being proactive where the issues are, but also almost being able to predict where they're going to be as well, right? We have these conversations all the time about teams. Why didn't they think about this? Why didn't that's what makes that job so hard, right? Because you don't plan for all these type of injuries, but some of them think that way. Some of them understand if they have an older roster. You have a guy that has had issues before, like Jordan Poyer, right? Like they knew about this. That's saying that they knew he was going to be in the position he's in now, but there has been preparation, and I agree with you. I think this is where Brandon Beane has done well.
Let's get to another guy coming off of injury. Jonathan Taylor set to open that 21-day practice window. It sounds like he's going to be practicing this week. It feels like the Colts are just trying to make us forget that all of that storm happened in August, and that he's just kind of on the ramp back to being back in the lineup. Where is the relationship right now between Jonathan Taylor and the Colts beyond his health, which we can get to in a second?
It reminds me of my friends when they go through breakups, right? And they try to delete all the pictures, right? And it's like their boyfriend never existed, and then the fight is over and they get back together and all the pictures show up again. You're like, wait, He's back? Oh,
We're just going to pretend that didn't happen, huh? All right, that's fine. You listen, you live your truth.
Most people don't care, right? They're just looking at it like, all right, whatever, do you? And I think if Indy fans certainly are looking at this like, do you? Like, we'll make this work. We don't care that you were trying to cheat on us. We don't care that you were trying to divorce us, leave us, and go get the money, right? So what I do think is interesting in this now, the relationship side does, I am very curious to see how this works. How does that conversation go from I want out, I don't want to be here anymore, you guys have no respect for me, blah blah blah, to this, to now he's going to be out practicing with these guys. He's not going to be in the black hoodie walking around. He's going to be actually participating. And you listen to head coach Shane Steichen, and he's like, oh, Jonathan can't wait to be out there. He's like really excited, right? As a head coach, you're not saying that unless you think that this guy is going to be contributing to your team significantly, right? He's not just going to go through the motions or perhaps have an ear infection, let's say in like a week, just to continue to stay off the field or sit out until week 8, whatever the plan would be. But from what I gathered, everything is pointing in the direction of Indy getting their great running back on the field.
Everything that happened from really the end of training camp until this moment, whether it be kind of floating it out there that you wanted a first-round pick for Jonathan Taylor, asking for Jalen Waddle as part of the returns in your trade with the Dolphins for Jonathan Taylor, everything about Chris Ballard's demeanor and his word choices during that press conference about this situation, saying that fences can be mended, relationships can be fixed. It's always seemed like they didn't want to trade him and they wanted to just try to weather this storm as much as they could. And if they pretended like it wasn't happening and everyone kind of took a step back, took a deep breath, they could get this back to a workable place. And whether it be through ignoring the problem or tending to it, it does feel like they might have gotten their wish with how things are trending right now.
They played this well, and they knew the market. And he knew if he kept that price real high, which is what they've consistently done. They have not come off that price. This is not an organization that has been answering phones to teams going, all right, I'll give you a third day pick on this, right? He is stuck in, a second day pick. Obviously wants the first day pick, but being maybe a little willing there. That tells you I'm not moving, right? Because there's also teams around the league that I know had called around a little bit just to sniff it out, not to have serious conversations about the compensation. But the big hang up was the actual contract. That was where I found a lot of teams just avoiding the situation because they don't want to pay him the contract he's looking for. So there is a world where we just went through weeks of drama with them. They looked like they were headed to divorce, but they could possibly be getting back together. He could be part of this team and perhaps be productive enough where, we're talking about a Colts team that could be going to the playoffs if they continue to play well.
The offense has shown a lot of exciting flashes. Richardson has shown that the ceiling is extremely high. I think it's a conducive offensive environment for success, all that stuff. But let's get down to the kind of the brass tacks here. Do you think we see him on Sunday? Do you think he plays as soon as this week?
Let's talk about his health first, right? So we know he's coming off this ankle situation. He's good. He's fine. Okay. So there's no reason why he wouldn't be able to play. Would he be on a pitch count? Most likely. But in terms of just health, let's put the contract to the side or his disappointment in it. He can play. It's just, he's been in the building. He has been working out. Is he in game shape? Probably not fully, right? You can't be if you're not playing. But he's ready to go. So it's just going to be curious to see if he and his camp are going to choose to go out there and play knowing they didn't get what they want. So Wednesday, the team has a walkthrough. Thursday, they practice. He's going to be out there, and we will see.
That's an optimistic situation, an optimistic view based on what their past would look like. Going the other direction, What is the latest with the Bears and Chase Claypool after all of the drama from last week? We heard that Claypool decided to stay home, that it was his choice. Then a team spokesman came out and clarified that no, actually they asked him to stay home. Matt Eberflus kind of hammered that home on Monday when he was asked about it. What does the future look like with the Bears and Chase Claypool?
Hammered it home. I mean, Eberflus was asked for almost 10 minutes straight about the situation with Chase Claypool, because this is just another example where the Bears organization feels like ignoring things as if it's just going to go away. And it's not, instead of just addressing it head on. But with that in mind, the way they're addressing this head on is by trying to remove him from the organization. Okay. So the Bears have been making calls all around the league to see if there are teams that would be interested in trading for Chase Claypool. I don't believe he's going to be on this team if they're not able to complete a trade. They have moved on from him within the walls of the building. They're just now trying to get something, some sort of compensation for him. At least some of those desperate teams out there who are in the market for a receiver, and the problem that they have right now is everyone has been watching this and seeing this and understanding that there's been problems with him as a player, not just on the field, on the sidelines, but in the building and meetings, being late. This could be a locker room cancer if he goes to the wrong team. I would think it'd have to be a team that has a very high standard and a very clear identity of who they are for this to work. Because I'm finding a very difficult time right now finding a head coach that would want this part of their team, a general manager that's trying to build something and take a risk on someone like Chase Claypool. But again, we've all seen it before, a team that's desperate that feels that they could use it in terms of the skill set because he can be helpful. We'd see. I'm curious to see who'd be willing to do it.
Is a trade a pipe dream in your mind, or do you think there is actually a market for him, even if it's not a robust one?
I do think there's a market. I think there are a few teams out there who are taking a look and believe that he could go to their team and maybe change. And that's really the only hope the Bears have, is that the team that they could trade with has belief that they're strong enough and they're built with sort of like a fierce, high character locker room that could maybe affect him and demand the best. But we'll see if they're able to do that, and if they wind up not being able to strike a partner if they cut him.
Goodness gracious, it's the Arrested Development meme come to life. Does it ever work? No, it never works. People just delude themselves into thinking it will, but it might work for us, and that seems to be the thinking potentially around Chase Claypool. Last thing I want to get to today, we're 4 weeks in, quarter mark through the season. Desperation is starting to pop up in some places, and I think that there's a level of urgency in some of these buildings based on how either some teams are performed or how some individual units have performed. Any spots, any offenses, defenses where you feel like the performance so far has justified a real look at potential changes coming?
Well, we can't spend this whole show talking about the Bears. We just touched on them, right? So they're being looked at.
That's a given.
Guess what? You don't have to be an insider. Taylor Swift could have told you that, right? Like, because she's an NFL fan now, so she even knows. And she saw them in person, actually, Robert. She saw them last week, was like, this is trash. This has to get better. Right? So
I can't believe she went to another game. That's the most impressive part to me, is that Travis Kelce took her to a Bears game and she was willing to watch more football.
I know, before the Jets went out there to play, the thought was like to go from a Bears to a Jets. Like, this woman's going to think that Travis Kelce and the Chiefs are even better than what they actually really are and truly are. But we'll see if she returns next week for the Vikings. I mean, yeah, she's got a tough lineup, man. She needs to see better competition.
Just three of the most cursed NFL franchises in the last several decades. She's getting up close and personal look so far.
She really is. I would love to get her thoughts on the football side of all this. But with that in mind, a team that I think she doesn't want to go see play are the Denver Broncos, as they're trying to figure it out. And look, they crawled out from being behind last week. But the problem is, it's the defense to me seems to be not as sound as you would think it could be and would be. And look, I think it's important to point out, this is not the same roster as what we saw last year, or strong defense. They lost players. So Vance Joseph had to step in here to try, well, continue to step in here, to work with what he has. And it's not as great, but the offense is figuring itself out. You have an offensive-minded head coach in Sean Payton. And just from covering him in New Orleans, he doesn't really get involved with the defense that much, right? Like, he doesn't have the time. He's all in on the quarterbacks. He's all in the offense. He's part of it, but he hands the keys over to the DC. That's what he does. So there's no way he's standing there going, this is good enough. I need answers, because he's a type of coach who will do that. He will knock on the door and say, I need an answer to this, because this ain't good enough. So that's a unit I'm watching closely.
It makes sense. I mean, they've been really bad. I mean, Justin Fields was having a career day before those last couple drives. And it's an interesting dynamic. Vance Joseph took over a defense that played really well last year. A lot of the staff stayed the same. You know, your key pieces on that staff, Christian Parker, their defensive backs coach, they kept their defensive line coach. So a lot of the story about that defense coming into the season is that he was going to be the one learning what they did on defense and being the one calling it. We've seen that work. Raheem Morris did that in Los Angeles with the Rams after Brandon Staley left. But that can be a little bit uneven, that kind of on-ramping period, getting used to a system, calling a system that you've never really run before. And we've seen it work. This is an example of it not working, at least up to this point.
I'm just curious to see how patient Peyton will be on this, especially, this week against the Jets. Zach Wilson coming off a good game, feeling confident. This locker room everyone feels better in New York. I know there's no moral victories, but they know they have something now, and they really needed a good performance against the defending Super Bowl champs. And so now they can head, to face this Denver Broncos defense that's been slashed up, and perhaps they'll be able to run the ball against them, which it looks like they'll be able to.
Well, the thought was that the Bears were going to be the get-right game for the Broncos defense. That didn't happen. So we'll see if Zach Wilson and the Jets, coming off of his best performance of the year, can be that get-right moment for the struggling Broncos team. Dianna, always great to chat with you. We'll be back here, same time, same place next week. Really looking forward to it. We'll talk to you soon.
Let's do it.